Warning! The following review was written by a guy who, at the time of this writing, has not played any video game in the Shin Megami Tensei Persona series. This includes the popular Persona 3, as well as the game the following anime series is based off of, Persona 4. If this fact makes you think that this reviewer is unable to give a fair review since he has not seen the original material that the series is based off of, feel free to leave now. You have 5 seconds. Adaptations take all forms. To me, the main purpose of an adaptation is to widen the audience of an original material by converting it carefully into another medium so that more people can enjoy it. Hollywood's been doing this for years, converting popular novels and comic books into successful and sometimes not successful films that audiences enjoy without any knowledge of the original material. As far as anime is concerned, it's actually very common practice for the majority of anime to be adaptations, usually adaptations of manga. In fact, I would actually say that it's rare to have an anime that is not an adaptation of anything at all. Now with games, usually what we end up seeing is adaptations of very popular visual novels. They're relatively safe from a production standpoint and are usually handled well enough to become successful series. But today we are going to be looking at an anime adapted not from a visual novel, where the story is the game itself, but rather from a PlayStation 2 RPG, where the immersion of the game no longer applies. It's more of a challenge that way, isn't it? Ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection today. Persona 4, the animation. Let's jam. The story of Persona 4 is what you would call a supernatural mystery. Our main character, Yu, has recently moved into a country town out in the boonies where everything is perfectly fine and normal. Except for the recent string of rather bizarre murders that has left the police, well, rather baffled. Normally one would just ignore the goings-on, were it not for the fact that the murders could be predicted. All of the victims were featured on the mysterious Midnight Channel, a sort of television program that's half static, half nothingness that only airs for a few moments at midnight on rainy days. On one such night, Yu attempts to witness the Midnight Channel, only to find himself almost dragged through the TV. Upon further examination and testing, Yu and his friends travel through the TV to another world similar to their own, gain the supernatural ability to summon creatures called personas, and try to unravel the mysteries behind the TV's other world and the murders before anyone else gets hurt. As much as this series is trying to branch out on its own, it's very easy to see that the story used to be from a video game, if you know what to look for, and I think that's one of the story's major setbacks. Pieces of the plot are just left open from what I assume to be game mechanics that just no longer exist because of the medium change. For example, at the start of every episode, the viewer is shown what is called the Velvet Room, where a creepy old guy and his assistant explain the various new powers that our main character Yu has gathered from his social interactions. The only problem is that Yu is never shown in these scenes and never makes any reference to them at any point, almost like they never happened, yet without them, key points of the story suddenly make no sense, as Yu suddenly gains Deus Ex Machina-like increases in power with which to defeat whatever new enemy arises. In fact, this show is actually at its best when it moves away from the pieces of the plot that are very game-like. There is a very large section of the story in the middle of the series where the new Persona a Week plotlines that we originally start with have concluded, but instead of diving straight into solving the mystery, we instead get this detour in favor of more character development for the show's rather large cast. Now, normally I would just call it filler and move on, but for Persona, it's not really filler at all. One of the show's major themes is that the bonds between people make them stronger, and having this large section of just pure character development does nothing but help that. But at the same time, it never truly forgets that looming menace overhead. The characters are both the best and possibly the worst part of the series, though I will admit the positives greatly outweigh the negatives. Each of the 7 main characters, excluding our protagonist, have their own individual story arcs that show them entering the series' other world and confronting a twisted shadow version of themselves that represent repressed thoughts and feelings that said character has yet to come to terms with. The episodes in which this all happens are, well, rather boring and formulaic, reminding me of the old Power Ranger episodes where the characters would defeat the evil, only to have it suddenly grow more powerful and difficult to defeat. And this happens almost every episode for a considerably long time. The only real salvation in these episodes is the unique characters themselves and their traits, ranging from the sheltered girl wanting freedom to the closeted homosexual who rather enjoys sewing. And that's what's great about this series' characters. They can be unconventional, they can be varied, but above all, they are human. Which is more than I can say for the traditional cardboard cutout stereotypes that I'm used to seeing. Hell, even the secondary characters, particularly the delivery girl Aika, are developed enough so that I can enjoy and get a laugh out of them. Of course, there is always the exception, and in this case, the exception is our main protagonist, Yu, because he's not really a character. He suffers from a problem that a lot of game adaptations have when the main protagonist was never really given any characterizations to begin with, because the gaps themselves are filled in by the player, making the protagonist whoever the player wanted them to be. Because of this though, Yu is rather bland, and in some cases almost void of emotion, like he's just there to experience, not to really contribute. Though one could argue that's part of his charm and what makes him a rather good character, though I still wish he had a bit more personality at times. Over the course of the show, he does start to come into his own, yes, but it takes way too long to get there. And until then, Yu is just mainly an emotionally distant person who everyone just happens to like, which is rather odd for a series based around characters and relationships. All I can really say about the animation is that it's good. It's nice, it's fluid, the action scenes are great, and the comedy moments are not off-putting. The only thing that's really odd about any of it is the rather interesting, that's a good word, yes, interesting gradient that they placed on almost everything. It's not always one particular color though, and it tends to prefer the yellows, but it just makes everything look, well, rather unique and distinct, almost as if every character has this weird sunburn below their noses. It's weird. As for the dub, well, let's just put it into a solid category of, yeah, it was pretty good. Now, at times there were lines that were delivered somewhat awkwardly, yes, but the skill of the voice actors themselves greatly made up for that, for the most part. For example, Johnny Young Bosch did a lot to help alleviate the blandness of Yu, and hell, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn is in this dub. I cannot remember the last time I have heard her voice in anything, which is saddening. Now, the biggest problem I have with this dub, however, was with the character of Teddy, or KUMA. In the Japanese dub, he has this rather peculiar verbal tick where he ends all of his sentences with KUMA to further emphasize that he is an anthropomorphized bear. The English, both in the dub and the subtitles, translate this as really, really horrible bear puns. And these puns are, well, let's just say that some of the worst puns that I've heard in a long while. Not as bad as, like, say, the old Pokemon ones were, but that's bearific? Seriously? While I can't say that this series was a good adaptation because I've never actually played the original, I can say that it was a fairly decent standalone series. While there are times that changes from the original are noticeable, there are also other times where the series does some really interesting things. Even if it's just something simple like having the date and the weather displayed at the change of every scene. It's far from perfect, however, and the slow and formulaic first number of episodes is going to be a very large barrier for some people. And hell, the ending was, well, I wouldn't say it was bad, I just, maybe lackluster? Yeah, it just felt a bit rushed, which was depressing. And then only to have an OVA episode come in and adapt the true ending, which didn't actually answer everything that was left open, and quite possibly made things more confusing. Unless, of course, perhaps you've played the original game, in which case, yes, then you would understand everything. But that's not the point of an adaptation. Adaptations at no point should ever force you to have knowledge from the original material. If they do, they have failed, because what would then be the point of it? An adaptation is supposed to be a substitution, not an addition to an original work. And in this case, Persona 4 the animation is meant for people who are not really interested in playing video games, but are still somewhat interested in what this story might be about. And in that way, it gets the job done. Maybe not as well as the original, but if you weren't gonna play the game anyway, you'll do just fine. And so with all that in mind, I've meticulously calculated values for the categories of story, characters, animation, sound, and my own personal enjoyment, which, after throwing it into a TV and bludgeoning it to death with bare puns, has me awarding Persona 4 the animation with an overall score of 7.22 out of 10, and an overall recommendation to stream it rather than buy. As great as the individual stories are, they are ultimately dragged down by the less than stellar introduction episodes and somewhat lackluster conclusion. You should probably see it at some point, but it's not something to necessarily go out of your way to watch immediately. Take your time. It'll still be here for you to watch later. At the time of this video, Persona 4 the animation has been licensed by Sentai Filmworks in North America on DVD, and is also available on the Anime Network and Hulu for legal streaming in North America, and I do believe that Mad Men also has the rights to it in Australia, though I am not entirely sure about the rest of the world. So see if you can pick it up or watch it from them. For alternate anime recommendations, I point you towards the supernatural mystery Gosick, which is on the lighter scale of things. However, if you want something a little more serious and rather gore-filled, then there is no better recommendation than Higurashi no Naku Koro ni, though that might be going a bit too far. Either way, between those two, hopefully, you should find something to your liking. And that's it from me. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, follow me on Twitter if you feel so inclined, and until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, stay frosty.